It's Sunday, November 3, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. Our guest today is a professor of history at NYU, a world-renowned expert on authoritarianism, and author of Strongmen, From Mussolini to the Present. She publishes a Substack newsletter entitled Lucid, about threats to democracy. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be speaking with you again.
We're just 2 days away from the general election, a special general election, I call it. But the race is neck and neck, surprisingly, considering that one party in Donald Trump is, to all intents and purposes, a self-proclaimed dictator. Why is this happening in a nation that prides itself on being the world's greatest democracy?
I think the toll of disinformation, we have to talk about that. And, back in 2016, people were ready for somebody like Trump. My research shows that whenever there's a society that's made a lot of progress and could be workers' rights, gender equity, racial equity, that prepares the ground for a backlash. But now we've had 8 years, almost since 9 years, really, since Trump came down the escalator. And he has been extraordinarily effective as a propagandist. That one of his end games has been to really make Americans feel that democracy is failing, and using disinformation, despite the robust economy, to make people feel that America is failing and thus democracy doesn't work, and that perhaps some kind of authoritarian governance would be better, which is why he's also been praising dictators for almost a decade.
In your career, you've written about dictators of history. And I suppose when you were writing Strongmen, and you were, obviously there is a chapter about Trump as a potential threat to democracy, but mostly you're talking about the Putins and the Pinochets of this world. Did you ever think in your lifetime, as an academic, that you would actually have to be having these conversations as you are now and potentially writing another book? Because it, to me, as somebody who moved to Barack Obama's America, what we're living through now was unfathomable.
It's unfathomable, but if you know the patterns of history, no country is immune from this. And when you have the right kind of charismatic demagogue come along, and when that person is able to capture a party, and we're particularly vulnerable if you look at things comparatively, like globally, because other nations have multi-party systems. And so if one party becomes captured by an autocrat, it's called autocratic capture, where the party becomes the personal tool of the demagogue, other parties can kind of band together and have an opposition coalition and get rid of them. That happened in 2023 in Poland. A 6-party coalition was able to help get rid of the far-right government. But we only have 2 parties. And we're an extraordinarily large nation, and these parties are large and powerful. And Trump has been able to get from local politicians, the city, municipal level, up to powerful senators to be his personal tools, even defend the January 6th insurrection that left them running for their lives and targeted a Republican vice president for death. These are things that sound like they're out of a political thriller, but it has happened here, and that is why we are in the situation we're in today.
I guess it doesn't help that there isn't a huge kind of political discourse in society, that, people are busy, they're working. America is also famously uneducated. It does not rank high in the kind of education stats. So really, there is a very large number of what they call low information voters, as much as I hate that phrase, who are not engaged with politics on a day-to-day basis and are really only thinking about it in the last few weeks before the election, if at all. I mean, how much of that is a problem for the United States? And is there some kind of master plan that actually to keep it that way? Because there are theories that say that they don't want people to be smarter and educated for exactly this reason.
Well, there's a reason that Republican, states have always voted against education, and there's a really good reason that wrecking public education, like public schools, which are really laboratories of democracy. They're places where children come together of different backgrounds, different races, different faiths, and civics is taught. And these are things that are very threatening to authoritarians. And so, trying to wreck the public school system, think of who has become a target. Anybody, it's really the big picture is that anybody who deals in facts and verifiable evidence, empirical, reality, whether it's scientists, academics like myself, prosecutors who make their judgments based on facts, judges, journalists, of course, a very wide group of people who always become the targets of authoritarians because authoritarians traffic in lies. And lies become state dogma and party dogma. And we've seen this happen here. And it's been able to happen because of the lower level, not just of education in America, but engagement. I'm always haunted by the fact that tens of millions of people didn't vote in 2016. I think it was like 80 million people, almost the same in 2020. They're not engaged at all in politics. And so these are the people who famously existed in other times and other places. And these are the people who wake up and only when it's too late and realize they've got their freedoms have been taken away and they weren't paying attention.
And we've heard from Donald Trump and his surrogates that the Department of Education is actually one of the first departments that they would shut down. I mean, they're actually saying that stuff out loud, and a lot of this is detailed in Project 2025, which, as we know, is the Heritage Foundation's plan for leadership, which basically forms Trump's manifesto. I mean, he doesn't really have much else that isn't aligned with that. So that's the most surprising thing to me, and even Kamala Harris has said, can you believe they actually wrote it down? So shutting the Department of Education, aside from other departments which currently keep us safe, the Environmental Protection Agency is one of them, and certainly the Department of Health and Human Services. I mean, they want to take what was the phrase that Mike Johnson used? He wanted to take a blowtorch to the regulatory state. Mm-hmm. I mean, they are not hiding the extremism, and we're just supposed to just sit and wait for this to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot to say here. On the issue of not hiding it, this is a psychological warfare tactic that Trump has always engaged in. Steve Bannon, who's been a kind of behind-the-scenes strategist of all this since 2015, even before, believes that you should beat people over the head with what you tell them is going to happen to them. And authoritarians often do tell you what they're going to do to you, because the goal there is to make you feel helpless. And it goes with propping up the personality cult of the strongmen, making him seem omnipotent. Of course, then he's suing and threatening, so you're afraid to push back. And so the idea is that whatever it is on whatever subject that they like to do, however extreme, you feel there's nothing you can do to stop it, and it's dangerous to try. So that's what's been going on. Now, on the subject of education, we have to now introduce the ideal of making America a white Christian nation. And so when you want to, crash public schools and get rid of the Department of Education, it's a scheme, as I said before, to wreck public education, which is where multi-faith, multiracial, laboratory of civics happens. And instead you have vouchers, you privatize education. Privatization and deregulation are the pillars of Project 2025. And you have people homeschooled. That's a big thing in religious households, Christian nationalist households, or they go to Christian schools. So that's part of this, they're thinking long term. And that's important for people to remember. Trump personally may be all over the place, repeating himself. He's got cognitive decline. But he has a method as a propagandist, and the people backing him, whether they're at Heritage or the Federalist or all the other places that are part of Project 2025, they have a long-term plan to shift the culture, the political culture and the culture of America, to make it a kind of white Christian ethno-state. So that schooling is always very important. I wrote about it in my book for the Nazis, the fascists, what Pinochet did to universities after the coup in Chile. He had huge purges, and rectors of universities were military officers. They always target education.
So interesting, isn't it, that it's been written before. The story's been written before, and we feel like they are coming up with it, on the fly. And actually, this follows an authoritarian pattern. But is Trump not turning out to be a useful idiot for these organizations that are behind these policy proposals? Because it is clear now. Obviously, he's 78 years of age. He has clear cognitive decline. Aside from his personality disorders, he's demented, and so this in itself is not going to mean he's not going to be around for very long as a leader, potentially, even though I'm sure he'd like to serve 2 or 3 or unlimited number of terms. So do you think that there is anything like that going on? Because there is a theory that J.D. Vance is actually the key to Project 2025's growth. And actually they're relying on Trump just getting them through the door, and then they can lay out their stall.
Yeah, Trump is still very formidable as a propagandist. He truly is. I'm going to say something that people think sounds weird, but he is one of the most skilled propagandists in history. And why do I say this? And I have a chapter on propaganda in my book that goes over 100 years. I teach a class on propaganda, so I've studied this for a long time. So when we think about how somebody is able to convince tens of millions of people to believe a very easy to verify lie, like who won the 2020 election, the mass deception at that scale, he's got, 40 million people believe this. He did this not in a one-party state like Mussolini and Hitler and all the others, or even something like Putin, where journalists are constantly getting killed. He was able to convince these people working in a democracy with a totally pluralistic media environment. And so he should never be discounted. And the strength of the bond people have with him is also very important. And he's also wily. When the assassination attempt happened in Pennsylvania, this was very interesting to me as somebody who studies autocrats, because these are durable people who react to crises in a different way than most people. So most people, they were shot at, whatever the reality was, if it was shrapnel, what hit his ear, we do not know. But he went down. Most people would have allowed the Secret Service to take them to safety. We got to get off into safety. Everyone knows that. He had the wherewithal to make it an iconic moment, because he's a man of images. He truly understands images very, very well. And so he rose up, exposing his face, exposing his whole side and his arm, and did the iconic fight, and the fist, thus making an iconic moment, which also was reassuring his followers that he was okay and he was going to endure. So from that point of view of personality cult, he should never be discounted. That said, yes, because of all this, he's getting people through the door, as you said. And then other partners of this enterprise surely have their eye on Vance, who is a very smooth, very smart, a total fanatic, total ideological fanatic, who's very close to Kevin Roberts and the rest of the 2025 gang. He wrote the foreword to Kevin Roberts' now delayed, book. And he has extreme views, as we all know, we've heard. He's an extreme misogynist, really views people as kind of assets to a state where women would be tools of demographic schemes. And he said that he would, deport undocumented immigrants and as well as people who are U.S. citizens. He said it doesn't matter if they're citizens. So this is somebody who is a total authoritarian, very frightening. And it's no wonder that he was placed there by Peter Thiel and the other very powerful billionaires who want to carry this forward into the future. So in that sense, your analysis, yes, is correct. But we also should never count out Donald Trump, because these guys have third and fourth and fifth lives.
I was going to say, most people of Trump's disposition and constitution and physicality might not have made it to 78, but he does seem to have multiple lives. Can I just go back to the shooting for a second before we move on to J.D. Vance? Because it was Mark Zuckerberg, when interviewed recently, who again is another one of these oligarchs, very powerful people in the world, as the owner of Meta and Facebook and Instagram and all these other worlds that we live in. And he said that when Donald Trump got up and punched the air, he thought that was badass and effectively endorsed him based upon that moment. And this is what is so very worrying, isn't it? That a lot of these oligarch types, and I think it's important that we in America start to refer to people like Zuckerberg and Musk as oligarchs. It's not exclusive to, the former Soviet Union. And so, again, that just leans support further to Donald Trump's cause, so that people forget about the specifics, the insurrection, the theft of classified documents, all of that stuff, and they just focus on the fact that he was like a superhero in the moment.
That's right. And that's why I was emphasizing the power of his personality cult. And it's just very interesting, like, to just give an example from somewhere else. In 2016, in Turkey, when there was a coup against Erdogan, a military coup, trying to get rid of him. And Turkey's a place there's been many, many coups. But and he was on vacation on the coast somewhere. And so they came to get him. It's not clear how he knew, but he went somewhere into hiding, a safe place. And then he called in instead of keeping quiet, he called in to CNN Turk, and he was put on the anchors. He used FaceTime. And so his little face was on the screen, held by the phone of the anchor at CNN Turk. And he made an appeal to the Turkish people to go out into the streets and defeat the military coup. So not everybody would have done that. And so what these guys do is they're survivalists, and self-preservation is when they're at their best and most creative. And so he was by doing this, he seemed like the hero, and everybody poured into the streets, and then the coup disintegrated. And so I thought about that and other episodes with Mussolini. Mussolini, he had many assassination attempts against him at the very beginning, and that's why he declared dictatorship. But he went around with a bandage on his nose. And instead of hiding away, he had a photo opportunity with the bandage on the nose. And I thought of that, of course, when Trump showed up with his ear bandage. So this isn't new. It's our turn to be living through this dynamics, but they're very powerful. They elicit very powerful emotional bonds and reactions. And so that's why, despite everything, he's a convicted felon, he's an adjudicated rapist, he is still there.
It is remarkable. And maybe the bandage is a kind of metaphor to confirm everything that you're saying, because the bandage was not necessary. He was photographed playing golf the day before without a bandage. It was a propaganda bandage. Mm-hmm. But it worked, because so many people at the RNC were also wearing bandages to match, in solidarity with their supreme leader.
Exactly. And that's the kind of group dynamics that keeps the personality cult going. And the other thing that's extraordinary, not only got, tens of millions to believe that he won the election, the guy's been out of power for years, and he's kind of old and washed up. And yet he's treated by people as though he's still the rightful leader. And it's and this extends to foreign affairs. When I'm very struck by 2 times Viktor Orban, his big partner, the head of Hungary, has come to the States. Now, who does he visit? Of course, he doesn't visit President Biden because he's snubbing democratic America. Where does he go? He goes to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring of Trump, who's like almost like he's a spurned president in internal exile. And Mar-a-Lago is like the bunker of internal exile. So he goes there, and then he goes to the Heritage Foundation, which has been like a shadow government in waiting. And that goes back to what we're talking about. Why are they so open with everything they want to do, right? And so this is why Donald Trump hasn't gone away, because he's been treated like the rightful president, not just by his deluded followers, but by people like Viktor Orban and all these elites who, yes, are using him for sure, but it's a mutual using. And that's the same with all the autocrats I've studied from Mussolini onward. They use each other. And then some people get burned. They think they never expect that things are going to become so radical and so violent. But by then they've signed on. It's hard to detach yourself.
This can actually be quite dangerous, though, having this shadow government that Trump, pretending he's still the president, wears the badge, people call him Mr. President, has the vehicles and the security, the Secret Service, I mean, all the stuff that goes with that. Because he met with Benjamin Netanyahu, and there were rumors that he basically, because they have a kind of an authoritarian bond, he basically potentially said to him, no ceasefire before the election. I mean, that appears to be playing out as well. And that is off the back of an active conflict that the United States is involved in Gaza. I mean, that is very serious and surprising to me that hasn't broken any conventions of American law that would prevent Trump from even seeking re-election.
Yes, you're right. And he's also been speaking to Putin regularly.
Right.
And I really see him. So I start my book with the prologue is about Berlusconi and Putin. And Berlusconi was a Putin partner. And before Berlusconi, there was Gerhard Schröder in Germany. And these are partners because Putin has always depended on foreign leaders to be his mouthpieces and to get his ideas across in European security meetings, and he depends on these heads of state. I see Trump as the same. He's a partner of Putin, and everything that he's proposing to do, getting out of NATO, withdrawing troops, benefits Putin's view of the world, and so this is important. And so and it's not just Putin. There's this kind of autocratic axis that's shaping up. North Korean soldiers are now fighting, for Russia in Ukraine. And so Trump is inserted into all of this. He's long been an ally of Netanyahu. I saw a quote the other day where, he was telling him, now he says, if I get into office, you're going to wrap up this war, because one of his lines is that he is the peacemaker.
Right.
Your audience should watch out for this, because this has been a big scam that all these autocrats are kind of promulgating. Orban keeps having this hashtag peace when he goes to see Putin. So war is peace. The autocrats are the peacemakers. And the line is that only Trump can prevent World War III, because Trump has the ear of the autocrats and he can tell them what to do. Now, this is ludicrous. Trump is a client, really, of Putin, and was paid by the Chinese millions of dollars while he was president. We know this documented in the Times and the Post. So, but this is what he's using to sell himself to Americans this World War III business, and that only Trump can prevent it, versus the globalist warmongers. That's a Bannon phrase that's now like very active around the world. It's the globalist warmongers. You could be in the 1930s, the globalists, shorthand for Jews, of course.
I mean, Steve Bannon we should probably mention, because he was released from prison about a week ago. He defied a subpoena. He went to jail. He has another case coming up where he fraudulently took money from people for this kind of Build the Wall foundation that he'd created. He, as you said earlier, is very much the architect of a lot of this chaos about flooding the market with noise, with information or disinformation, so that people don't really know what to think or who to believe, and consequently who to vote for. And when Trump can then come along and say, well, these are all the problems and I alone can fix it, then it's an easier option for them to just put their safety in the hands of Donald Trump, the despot, rather than have to actually do any work, read any policy documents, or take any interest in the kind of political sphere. So the timing of Steve Bannon's release from prison is a little frustrating, isn't it? Because, he's straight back into his War Room podcast. He's straight back into sowing this information, this disinformation. And it really is, he is like a clear and present danger. And yet he has a huge army of fans, not least Donald Trump.
He's always been a huge danger. I wrote a piece for CNN Opinion right after Trump was inaugurated, and it was called Trump and Bannon's Coup in the Making. And it was about Bannon's idea of dismantling the administrative state and flooding the zone, not only with disinformation, but chaos, making chaos. And that goes straight into Project 2025. So an important point is that, Bannon is an extremist. He wears rumpled, he looks disheveled. Yeah. He's really a fascist, also a Leninist. He's a revolutionary in his own way. He's a chaos agent. And so it can seem like he's very different than, for example, Kevin Roberts, who wears suits and is the CEO of the Heritage Foundation. But they're very close. And Roberts he was going on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast. If you read Project 2025, it says Bannon things like dismantling the administrative state. That's been a Bannon goal since when I wrote that piece, since 2016-17. So Bannon is at the center of all this. He also works internationally. He moved to Italy for a while, and he was trying to have a kind of training university for right-wing operatives, and then that didn't work out. But he advised Bolsonaro before Bolsonaro did his January 8th insurrection copycat thing. So he's very dangerous, both within the U.S. and also because of the reach of his ideas. And, it's very scary to have him out, but we have to realize that it's not that he's over here and the upstanding Project 2025 people are over here. They're all extremists.
They're one of the same. We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the word fascist, because Vice President Harris has actually now, in the last couple of weeks before the election, started to use the word fascist to describe her opponent. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. I'm excited to tell you about Moink. That's Moo plus Oink. Moink is a meat subscription box company on a mission to fight for the family farm. They're located in rural America, run by an 8th-generation female farmer. Their animals are raised humanely, their employees are paid a living wage, and the quality of their product is better than anything you'll find in a store. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon straight to your door. Moink farmers farm like our grandparents did, and as a result, Moink meat tastes like it should, because the family farm does it better, and the Moink difference is a difference you can taste. Unlike the supermarket, Moink gives you total control over the quality and source of your food. You can choose the meat delivered in every box, like ribeyes to chicken breasts, pork chops to salmon fillets, and much more. Plus, you can cancel any time. Moink is helping to save rural America. Join the Moink movement today. Keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/weekend right now. And listeners to this show get free hot rolls in your first box. The best hot rolls you'll ever taste, but for a limited time. Spelt MOINK box.com/weekend. That's moinkbox.com/weekend. Today's episode is brought to you by Ali. Clean, fresh nutrition your dog needs in 5 flavors they'll absolutely flip over. You don't have to be a veterinary nutritionist to know that feeding your dog real whole foods with minimal processing is one of the best choices you can make for their health. A perfectly portioned, whole fresh diet has been proven to extend your pup's life by 2.5 years. Who doesn't want more time with their best friend? With absolutely no harmful fillers, no preservatives, Ali is made in US kitchens with ingredients carefully sourced from trusted growers and producers around the world. With 5 protein-first recipes like fresh beef with sweet potato, fresh turkey with blueberries, fresh lamb with cranberries, you might start thinking, dang, my dog eats better than I do. And that's probably true when it comes to Ali. Fill out Ali's 30-second quiz and they'll create a customized meal plan based on your pup's weight, activity level, and other health info. Ali crunches the numbers and recommends the right recipes and daily portions for your precious pup based on hundreds of thousands of real dog results. Right now, Ali is offering a fantastic deal to let your pup taste test a personalized meal plan. So head to ali.com, tell them about your dog, use weekend, and you'll get 60% off your first box of meals when you subscribe today. Head to ollie.com and enter code WEEKEND to get 60% off your first box. They offer a clean bowl guarantee on their first box. If you're not completely satisfied, you can get your money back. We're back on the Weekend Show with Ruth Ben-Ghiat. I'm Anthony Davis. Vice President Harris has called the disgraced former President Trump a fascist. She did it at a CNN town hall a week or so ago in Pennsylvania, echoing his one-time chief of staff's criticism as she makes a more vocal pitch to voters that he is unfit for office. Of course, she's referring to John Kelly, who is the retired 4-star Marine general who was Trump's longest-serving White House chief of staff, and he came forward to warn that his former boss meets the general definition of a fascist. Ruth, this is a word that is, rarely used, especially at this level, and we shouldn't think of it as normal for a political leader, especially one who is in office as vice president, to actually use it against her opponent unless it's absolutely true. I mean, and that really, to me, was the seriousness of this whole storyline. Because I've been calling him, as you have, a fascist for almost a decade. But for Vice President Harris to say it, what did it mean when you first heard that?
So the reason she was saying it is that General Mark Milley had the retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, thus not a radical leftist or an anarchist, subversive, Antifa type, had used it to refer to Trump, saying both he's a total fascist and also that he's fascist to the core. Pretty strong statements. Then, General Kelly used the word, and General Kelly was Trump's chief of staff, and so had a daily insight into Trump's adulation of Hitler and famously wanting U.S. generals to act like Hitler's generals. And so Kelly tried to tell him that actually Hitler's generals tried to kill him several times, which is also documented in my book. And then former Defense Secretary Mark Esper, again, not a radical leftist, used the word. And so when Vice President Harris was asked about these references, she said, the interviewer said, can we call him a fascist? And she said, yes. So it created an opening to use this word. I myself did not use the word for a long time with Trump. I used authoritarian. And that's because, of course, there's so many things that are taken straight from fascism that Trump does and says. But he's equally enamored of communist dictators,
Right.
whether it's Kim of North Korea or Xi of China. And is not just enamored of their personalities. He talks about, oh, Chinese justice system is so great. You can have somebody executed in a few hours, you know. So it seemed to be reductive to call him a fascist because while inside countries, left and right mean something, at the highest level of corrupt authoritarian power, left or right don't have much meaning, which is why, for example, the fascistic Putin is allied right now with Xi Jinping, communist dictator, and communist troops from North Korea are fighting in Ukraine for fascist Putin. So those distinctions lose a little of their meaning, whether the right and left stuff. And so Trump fits in there. And they're all, you know, Anne Applebaum's new book, they're connected. It's above ideology. So anyway, that's why I personally, even though I've written 2 books on fascism, before Strongmen, I didn't use the word. But it's very important to use the word in our domestic context because, you know, he complained, he doesn't like people calling him a fascist. Indeed, he sued CNN in 2022 for saying that people were comparing him to Hitler. And my work, an op-ed I did was mentioned like on page 1 of the legal complaint. But he's the one who is using the language of Nazism. He even made a campaign ad where he says, I'm going to be, you know, where they said he's going to be recreating a unified Reich, using the word Reich. I mean, on and on with the examples we could draw, and the Madison Square Garden rally. So fascism, which, you know, it doesn't happen the same way today because the classic fascist dictatorships were one-party states. So today we don't have as many one-party states outside communist dictatorships. But it's important to make that label because what he wants is absolute power. He wants to shut down any opposition to himself. He wants to send political opponents a large variety of targets, journalists, political opponents, to prison, or the other day talked about Liz Cheney should have guns trained on her, you know, talking about firing squads. This is all fascist.
He probably couldn't define fascism versus communism versus Marxism or any of the isms that he often accuses Kamala Harris of being. Projection is very much a theme in Donald Trump's armory, isn't it? And you know, he's now saying that she's unhinged and that she's dumb, and he's actually talking about himself, and that's what the psychologists say. You just reverse everything that he says. These are actually his insecurities, and when he says she doesn't know anything about anything, he deep down knows that he doesn't know anything about anything. And I found that very interesting when interviewing the psychiatrists. And that's a whole other topic because the media just won't go there when it comes to the kind of psychiatric analysis of him. But we do know that he's a malignant narcissist. We know about this personality disorder, the ego, the self-absorbed nature of his shadow presidency as well as his former presidency. But what about the people that he has successfully brainwashed who also don't necessarily understand the definitions of the isms, but say, well, I'm voting for Trump because Kamala Harris is a Marxist or she's a communist or a socialist? I mean, he has had some success with the repetition of these isms.
Yeah, and that's why it's very important to recognize his skills as a propagandist and the toll of disinformation, which is where we started. And none of this would have been possible without Fox News, which it carries out the principle of repetition. So propaganda, there's a couple of like principles, and they meaning Trump and Fox and all of the lackeys in the GOP. They've really they've been very good about putting these into action. One is repetition. You have to have the same message with tiny variations, so it doesn't seem stale, repeated. And so that's how the conditioning comes forth. Because really the aim of these authoritarians is, it's not about getting you to believe this lie or that lie. It's about changing the associations you make with groups that are targeted. Thus the immigrants, they're eating cats and dogs, they're spreading disease, on and on and on. Or Jews, he said stuff about Jews being cheap, or the globalists. So, and that's, of course, comes from Hitler, right? And Mussolini later. So it's about changing your worldview. And for that, the repetition is very, very important, as well as believing that truth, that it's only the strongman who's the arbiter of truth. And he's been able to do that. And that's where the elite enablers, the collaborators, the Fox News hosts, all the GOP, even up to recently, Glenn Youngkin of Virginia gets on TV and says, oh, yes, he won the election in 2020. They keep repeating the lies. And so, you have to have, like, it's not just the top tier. You have to have the lie trickle down. And so people who are trusted in communities, maybe a town council member, they will repeat the lie. And that's how you keep the lie going. And that's how you get like the millions of people, the foot soldiers, the followers, to keep believing these lies even after years. It's extraordinary. But it all stems from the control of the party and the complicity of the media. Once those bargains and deals are made, you have a structure to get the lies in order, let's say.
The lie that hurts me the most is when he points at the press at his rallies and says, there they all are, the fake news, they're the enemy of the people, they won't show the crowd size, all that stuff. But, he's been saying that for so long now that this kind of fake news mantra has embedded itself into the modern vernacular. And it's insane, because that has really fueled his ability to create this upside-down world where we don't know what is true. And living in these social media information silos means that he has almost successfully created a duality of realities. So he might have lost the election, but yet only in your reality. But in someone else's reality, with their social media algorithm, he won.
That's right. And that's how you got people to be so invested in his fake reality that they were willing to get arrested and go to the Capitol on January 6th and save him. Because January 6th, the way I see it, it was many things, but it was a leader rescue operation. He called them to the ellipse. He said, if you don't fight like hell, you won't have a country anymore. It was a personal rescue for him. And they responded. And that's actually talking about narcissists. That's why he refers disgustingly to January 6th as a day of love. Because for the narcissist, what better proof of love for him? That's all he cares about, is that he's controlling people. And what better proof of love that these thousands and thousands of people did this for him? And so it's very sick. It's a very sick and destructive. And unfortunately for us, when I did this research for Strongmen, I found that while the outcomes are different, of course, we're not Idi Amin's, country or Gaddafi's Libya. Unfortunately, the personality types are the same. And Trump matches up on all the metrics with other dictators who have done huge, huge damage and brought tragedy on their countries.
But this is also why the loss of expertise in analysis, both the mental health professionals and the kind of history experts like yourself, because we don't rely on expertise and opinion has kind of become the leading barometer, especially on these news channels. I mean, the psychologists and the historians will tell you, of course he didn't intervene when January 6th was going on. Of course he enjoyed watching it on television. Of course he spent 3 hours just, it was probably his most favourite show that he's ever seen, other than a documentary on Wales. And so I really, wish that we enabled experts to kind of come into the discourse and actually guide us, as opposed to just news people with an opinion, because we need to stop judging him by moral standards. If the guy is mentally ill, if the guy is following these patterns of authoritarianism, then people like yourself and the psychiatrists can tell us exactly what he's doing and what his next move is.
Yeah, and I think the two situations are slightly different in that the psychiatrists, there was the Goldwater rule, and they're not supposed. So the discipline of psychiatry had a problem with members of their profession speaking out. History doesn't have that, and although if you take the path that I have and go on TV frequently and do media too, I decided in 2016. I after Trump said I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and I wouldn't lose any followers, I really did decide that I had a skill set that I could educate people. And so that started all my writing for CNN and then later being on TV. So historians, also Timothy Snyder, we've been able to go on, not on all networks, but we've been able to be out there. Now, there's a price in some ways. Sometimes you're considered less professional or less academic if you do those things. There are people who will look down on you. But for myself, that I don't care because it's too vital to save our democracy, and that this is my own small contribution, educating people to the authoritarian playbook as it's unfolding, because it's very difficult for people to grasp what's going on, and especially if things are scary, it's easy to just disengage, and there we go back to what we were saying before. You wake up only when it's too late.
I want to just set the record straight about the Goldwater rule, because this is something that is often misunderstood. The Goldwater rule was, has been abused in recent years, and this is the American Psychiatric Association coming forward and saying, the Goldwater rule says that you can't diagnose Trump from a distance and all that stuff, and that's why the media didn't allow the psychiatrists to kind of come on and talk about his mental health. But actually, none of that is based in fact either. I mean, the APA was given a huge donation by the Trump administration in order to, push this, that there is nothing to say that you can't diagnose someone such as Donald Trump from a distance, considering that he has been interviewed 1 million times and is always, on television, and that actually if he was in a session with a psychiatrist, he would behave in a very different way specifically for that moment. And so I do think that all of us, we need to kind of stop thinking that the Goldwater rule is an excuse but effectively psychiatry has been shut down by the media for no good reason.
Yeah, I can't comment, not being a psychiatrist, on that professional. It's a loss because there's very important things to learn. And when a damaged individual, this was, the reason that I can say that the reason that authoritarians spend so much time, including hiring foreign public relations firms to depict their governments as efficient and getting things done, the trains will run on time like in fascist Italy, is that behind the scenes, because they are so damaged, they're just about loyalty and retribution, and a lot of them have, substance abuse problems or sex addictions. It's a clown show. They're constantly hiring and firing people. It's the opposite of efficiency. I can tell you that.
Right.
That I didn't know how dysfunctional behind the scenes this was, and it's a pattern.
Well, we've seen it with Trump. He's not being
Exactly.
endorsed by any of his former appointees. And he's had to get a new vice presidential candidate. I mean, that in itself is also another example of how he, even Mike Pence refuses to endorse him.
Yeah, which is a commentary on not just his character, but his methods.
Yeah.
And so the tragedy is that many people still fall for the idea of the authoritarian as being good for the economy, or, they love big infrastructure projects. Erdogan's always talking about the Istanbul Canal, the bigger the better. Mussolini built all the sports stadiums, and so people were cheering him. In the meantime, he's killing people, and look how they ended up. They lost a war, and the people in Naples were living in caves. So I tried to talk about the outcomes that happen from this truly dysfunctional form of governance.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because, Trump's theory that if you befriend dictators, that you therefore protect your own nation from conflict is such a flawed argument. Could we just talk to that for a moment? Because, that is something that we're hearing from MAGA Republicans all the time, is that, there was no new wars under Donald Trump. That in itself, A, it's incorrect, but B, it talks to the brainwashing that Trump has successfully communicated what he wants them to think, despite the fact that it's completely untrue.
Yeah, it's completely untrue. And the sad thing is that, we know that Putin, who he's closest to, wants to destroy American democracy. And that's where we go back to, if you are a Putin or a Xi and you have imperialist ambitions, the power and the professionalism of the U.S. military is a huge problem, a big problem. So what do? You insult the military, you try and domesticate them, you say you're going to withdraw from NATO, you start talking instead about perhaps, Putin and Xi and Kim are not our adversaries. And these are lines that Vance is also advancing.
Yes. So
there's no doubt in my mind, if Trump goes back to the White House, America will be part of this autocratic axis. That's where it's going. The price of that is that the military, now whether the military would do this, I do not know, and I'm not saying they would. But the plan is to partly use the military for domestic repression. That's why he's starting to talk about using the military for mass deportations. And our state would have different priorities. Getting rid of 15 million people is like emptying out the entire population of Sweden or Bolivia or Belgium. It's insane. And the military would have to be involved. But then they're not being involved policing Putin. So if you look at it geopolitically, a lot of the domestic propositions and the rhetoric makes sense in terms of America being reoriented to supporting autocracy. It's a drastic change. And that is why Milley and Kelly and Esper and others are speaking out in these very vivid terms using the word fascist. That's why they're speaking out now, because they know all of this and they know much more.
But they've taken their sweet merry time about it, though. And even people like Bob Woodward have been sitting on information, especially that information that Trump had sent those COVID testing machines to Putin for his personal use. I mean, that information we could have done with 2 or 3 years ago. And to sit on it for a book is an example of how there is a complicity in the media.
That's sad. It's sad. If you're going to put country and democracy first, you don't perhaps behave that way.
We have to take another quick break, but I want to come back and talk about Trump's plan to overturn this election in just a couple of days' time. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. Lomi might just be the smartest appliance I own. It's like having an eco-friendly assistant that handles all my food waste. Lomi lets me turn my food scraps into dirt with a push of a button. It's a countertop electric composter that takes my waste and transforms it into nutrient-rich dirt in less than 4 hours. I run it while I sleep, just like my dishwasher. No more smelly bins, and it's so quiet you barely notice it's running. Since I got my Lomi, I'm taking out way less garbage. I used to struggle with 3 full bags of trash every week. Now I'm down to just 1. What I love most is how much waste I'm keeping out of landfill. Less trash means less methane, and with Lomi, I'm turning that waste into nutrient-rich dirt that my plants absolutely love. If you're ready to start making a positive environmental impact and make cleanup a breeze. If you're ready to start making a positive environmental impact and make cleanup a breeze, Lomi is exactly what you need. Head over to lomi.com/weekend and use promo code WEEKEND to get $50 off your Lomi. That's $50 off when you go to lomi.com/weekend and use promo code WEEKEND at checkout. Say goodbye to food waste and hello to a cleaner, greener kitchen with Lomi. And with the holidays coming up, Lomi makes the perfect gift for someone on your shopping list. We're back on the weekend show with Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Ruth, the polls have been neck and neck in this election. There's a lot of talk that the polling itself is stacked with Republican funding and that we shouldn't trust those polls. And that's very much my opinion, fingers crossed. But there is also a potential coup that is underway where Donald Trump, if he loses, as he did back in 2020, will reject the result and claim that he is the rightful winner. And there is a chance that Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is involved in this plan, not to mention the legislatures and Trump loyalists who might refuse to certify. What are your fears just going into this election in a couple of days' time regarding this plan to overturn the result?
I think that too many people have invested too much for too long to go quietly. Let's remember that Project 2025, which has been training people for years, they call them an army of politically vetted civil servants, and the code word is day one. Whether it's Trump saying, I'm going to be a dictator on day one, or Project 2025, they're talking about deploying the army of civil servants on day one. So all these people, and Project 2025 is made up of over 100 organizations. This is thousands and thousands of people have invested for years in getting Trump back to the White House. So if he loses, they already, as you mentioned, have all kinds of schemes to try and invalidate the election. And this is why GOP lackeys, i.e. senators and congresspeople, have been going on TV and will refuse to say whether they're going to accept the results of the election, and including J.D. Vance, who just won't answer that question. And this is how you know they're no longer in democracy. This is an autocratic party that has left democracy behind, because democracy is about recognizing free and fair elections. And they no longer do that. So they're going to try everything they can. We could also see, some repeat of some kind of organized violence around January 6th if it gets that far. So again, never underestimate these people. On the other side, there's been, we went through this before, and there's been a lot of preparation and guardrails put up. And this time he is not the incumbent. That makes a huge difference. He is not the incumbent. So that's how I see the situation.
The downside to him not being the incumbent is that he could seek to take the White House by force and use this army. And as we know, there are a lot of Republican fans who are armed, and there are the millions of AR-15 style weapons. I mean, the yes. Civil war that they talk about on the social media chatter, they're kind of goading for it to happen, though, aren't they?
They've always been goading for it to happen. The Civil War. They've been talking about this, the most excitable, violent people for a long time. But, President Biden is the commander-in-chief. And there have been times when the Capitol or the White House has been barricaded. There are ways to do things to protect these buildings so that doesn't happen again if you are the incumbent and you are the commander-in-chief. So that's a difference. That's different. It's very hard to predict, but we know because they're making it public what all the different schemes, the state level, the federal level, that they're hatching to try and hang on even if they lose.
Finally, could you just talk to the antidote to all of this authoritarianism in Kamala Harris and the Democrats? Because, you know, she really is the antithesis of all of this hate and all of this negativity. She is running on hope and on joy and on turning the page and not going back.
This is, you know, it's extraordinary how these two options that are each one the antithesis of autocracy, the other democracy and its promises. And it's the progress that we have made. Our economy is among the most robust in the whole world, right? The Economist says the envy of the world. We have made huge progress in really realizing the ideals of being a multiracial democracy, which is why at the state level there's been all this backlash to you know, make the history of racism vanish, make DEI vanish, all of that. So I've been really pleased with the Harris-Walz campaign because just as the Trump campaign's been rehearsing autocracy with the help of Project 2025, what the Harris-Walz campaign's been doing is effectively building a kind of pro-democracy movement. And that's also what the Republicans for Harris phenomenon, which I wrote about in my Substack, I called it crossing the line. These are the things you have to do. And again, before we mentioned that we don't have a multi-party system, so we're kind of fossilized. But Republicans for Harris is and Vice President Harris in a speech said, "There's a home for you here." So there's been a way within the constraints of a bipartisan system to kind of build this big tent for people who believe in our democracy to get us through this election. And I think on that basis, something new could happen in our democracy. Many, many people with the joy and the hope, I was thrilled to see this because I have a part in my resistance chapter about the power of hope, the power of joy. The Chileans had a march for joy when they were trying to get back their democracy. So they're doing all the right things in a very difficult situation. And I'm looking at that not only for this election, but into the future.
Okay. Fingers crossed. For now, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, thanks very much for joining The Weekend Show.
Thank you.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can see more from me on the 5 Minute News channel, and I'll be back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.